I had, this is back in, around 2005, 2006, 2007, I had like a catalog full of books on For Dummies. So I would just like Photoshop for Dummies, Dreamweaver, which was the HTML, building site, and everything was built on Flash, right, back then. And so I had more time than I had money, and I really enjoyed this stuff. And I also thought to myself, I'm like, well, if the music thing doesn't work out, then all the stuff that I'm doing to market myself, maybe I could do for a company, a business down the road, right? I'd sold advertising before. I understood the game to some degree. So that was, again, foundational in what I'm doing now. Because it like in hindsight, the roadmap looks less messy than at the time. I was like, I'm playing music 4 nights a week at bars, college bars. I'm in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s, late 30s. Welcome in, episode 1 of Market Like a Rockstar. My name is RPI. It's my brand new podcast, and I appreciate you checking it out. It's a little different. I haven't done anything by myself in quite a while as far as podcasting goes, and I certainly have not done anything just talking to a camera by myself, ever. So, appreciate you listening to this. I thought I would get started with kind of going into my background, who I am, what I'm doing, and what this podcast is going to be all about. So, when I introduced myself, I said my name is RPI. My name is actually Ryan Patrick Emming, and the moniker RPI came up back in 2001. I mean, I'm really dating myself here, but back in the day, I started playing music full time. I had a band when I was in college, graduated in 98. The band broke up in 99. I started playing music by myself in 2001. And my name is Ryan Emming, Ryan Patrick Emming. And there was no, just from a marketing standpoint, there was no good way for me to go by Ryan Emming or Ryan Patrick Emming or any of that. So I just started branding myself as RPI because it worked better. It was easier to sell. It was easier to put on a flyer, quite frankly, and let people know. So that's where that kind of came from. And then people started calling me RPI, and it stuck. And I feel like there's a million Ryans out there, and there's like one RPI that I've found. So anyway, that's where the name comes from. And it's a little obnoxious, I think, to have like a nickname, but it also has worked. And at this point, it's been over 20 years. So I don't mind it. And I went ahead and started my business 6 years ago, my content creation marketing business here in Kansas City, and it's called RPI Creative. So now I'm going to take a couple steps backwards, and I'm going to get into kind of my history and why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I'm starting a podcast now. So I grew up and I was always into audio and video production, things like that. Went to school at the University of Missouri. I I did 1 semester at the J School. If you know anything about journalism schools, like nationwide, Mizzou is one of the top journalism schools in the country. And the first class I was in, they called it a weed out class. It was J200. And within the first day, there were kids there from like all over the world, actually. And I knew that I was not in the right place. So I transferred to what they call Journalism Light, which was communications at Mizzou, where I studied, basically, I think it was a lot of the same type of stuff, but it just wasn't as cutthroat. And the people that were in the communications department weren't necessarily trying to get jobs at CNN or Fox News or the local TV station. A lot more of us were focused on things like advertising, marketing. We had a couple guys I graduated with that did go to work at MTV, which back then, that was awesome. It was a huge deal, right? But anyway, so I'd always been into recording audio and video, started playing music when I was a senior in high school, got into that, and then I went and studied audio and video production in college. Now, this is back in the day. So we were the last class that graduated at Mizzou. Again, dating myself here, but this was before digital video and audio production. So I graduated, I did that stuff, and I'd started a band my junior year. And what I didn't know at the time was I was really getting my feet wet in the sales and marketing side of things, because the band I started, I did all of our sales and marketing, and it was all guerrilla stuff. We didn't have any money, of course. So we would make flyers and we would do posters, and we had a website back when websites were barely anything. We had an email list, which was crazy, but we also had a snail mail list. And so we were doing content marketing, which at that time there was no name for it, but that's really what it was, because essentially we would give out, or, we get people to sign up. They'd sign up their snail mail addresses at our shows. And every month or 2 months, we would send out like a newsletter that basically had stories from the road, because we were touring around these college towns in the Midwest. And on the backside, we'd have a list of tour dates. So if you had seen us at a bar in Macomb, Illinois, at Western Illinois University in January, then you would know that we're coming back in April, stuff like that. So when I look at what I'm doing now, back then, I had no idea that I was laying the groundwork for what I'd be doing 20 years down the road, but that's really what was happening. So I started that band my junior year of college. We stayed in Columbia for a couple of years after I graduated, kind of toured all over the Midwest, had a little bit of regional success, had a lot of fun doing it. But at the time, I think I was 24 or 25 years old, and I thought I was old. Back then, you don't realize when you're that young, that 25 is old, especially if you're 25 in a college town. You really are old. And so the band broke up. We weren't famous. We thought we should be famous after 3 years or signed to a record deal or whatever. And it didn't happen. So, we broke up. I came back to Kansas City, got into selling radio advertising. And when I was doing that, started doing morning show production for the same station I was working for. But I was selling advertising, and I did that for about not quite 2 years. And I realized quickly I loved doing the production on the morning show. And what that meant really was I was making up like Adam Sandler style parody songs. And while I was selling radio, I started playing music as a solo artist by myself. And what's crazy is I ended up giving my 2 weeks notice the week of September 11th, 2001. And I can't remember what day that landed on in 2001, but I know I had just given my notice, and that happened. And I had already built up enough dates. And I had already done the band thing where I had connections. So I was playing in, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 cities regularly. But at that time I was playing music and I was still into the production side of things, but that was in 2001. So technology wasn't what it is today. We didn't have the ability. Social media wasn't even a thing yet. Making a CD, you still had to go to a real studio, and make a CD. Now I had gotten my first digital, like 12 track recorder in right around 2001 or 2002, and made this awful, 11 song CD that I sold at my shows and pressed like 1,000 of them, sold at my shows. Anyway, did the music thing, ended up for until 2016. So for 15 years, I played music live. And along the way, I started getting into I continued to do audio and video production, right? So I bought Pro Tools in 2005, and I got a flip camera and Final Cut, and I was making little videos to promote my shows. And when MySpace rolled around, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And you started seeing people like Dane Cook in particular, who basically made his career out of MySpace. And people hate Dane Cook now, whatever. At the time, he just exploded. He was the first artist that I saw that really capitalized on social media. And on the music side of things, you had bands like Dispatch that were really thriving off of like the pirate sites like Kazaa and LimeWire and things like that. So the whole time that I'm playing music, and I'm playing music 4 nights a week or whatever, I am also, just to promote my music, I am creating videos. I'm doing morning show production on the side. So I'm actually producing my own music, but I'm also producing audio for different morning shows around, doing parody songs and parody commercials and stuff like that. And I also decided I needed a website, and I had to build my own website. So this is back in, around 2005, 2006, 2007. I had like a catalog full of books for dummies. So I would just like Photoshop for dummies, Dreamweaver, which was the HTML, building site, and everything was built on Flash right back then. And so I had more time than I had money. And I really enjoyed this stuff. And I also thought to myself, I'm like, well, if the music thing doesn't work out, then all the stuff that I'm doing to market myself, maybe I could do for a company, a business down the road, right? I'd sold advertising before. I understood the game to some degree. So that's really that was, again, foundational in what I'm doing now. Cause it like in hindsight, the roadmap looks less messy than at the time. I was like, oh, I'm playing music 4 nights a week at bars, college bars. I'm in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, that whole thing. And so anyway, I ended up moving to Nashville in 2010, and I jumped on, of course I mentioned I'd done some stuff on MySpace like everybody did, got into Facebook a little bit, but what really flipped a switch for me was, I think it was 2009 is when I got on Twitter. I was an early adopter on Twitter. I feel like it was around that time I bought the book Crushing It. I think it was Crush It by Gary Vee. And it was interesting because when I got on Twitter at first, kind of like everybody, you didn't know what to make of it, right? People were posting like what they had for dinner, just kind of silly stuff. By the time I moved to Nashville in 2010, I was playing music in, SEC towns like Oxford, Ohio, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Auburn, Lexington, Kentucky, Columbia, Missouri, of course. And then a lot of the smaller towns, Florence, Alabama. So Wednesday through Sunday, I'd be on the road playing these shows, and Twitter really became something that it just clicked with me. I understood it, and it gave me a way to communicate with, I say fans. I hate to use the word fans because I was playing bars. It's not like I was playing amphitheaters or whatever, but it gave me the ability to talk to people that were coming to my shows. And the craziest thing happened this would have been 2010, 2011 when I was in Nashville. And I would trade people. I'd give people a free CD for following me on Twitter. They would show me they follow me. I'd give them a CD. And then I also had people tweeting requests at me. So not only was I getting requests, but I was also, people were tweeting at me, tweeting pictures from my shows. And all of a sudden, I did all of my own booking, all of my own management. I did everything on my own because I moved to Nashville to write songs. So I wasn't trying to become, Luke Bryan or Kenny Chesney or, any of those guys, Zach Bryan. Now, I wasn't trying to become a star. I wanted to be a songwriter. And so I wasn't worried about getting a booking agent or a manager. I did all that stuff on my own, and I'd done that stuff for so long that I was comfortable doing it. And again, I felt like the skills that I was using on that side of the business would be something that I could always apply to a different business down the road, which ended up working out. So I was out of nowhere. I was tweeting about, whatever. I was on the road. I was driving 85,000 miles a year. So I was driving like a maniac. So Wednesday through Sunday, I'd be on the road playing shows. And the entire time I was on the road, I was just tweeting. Well, out of nowhere, I didn't have to make cold calls anymore. Because when I first moved to Nashville, especially, I was just basically cold calling. I was like, okay, well, I'm from Kansas City, and I'd been playing in all of the college bars in Iowa, in Missouri, in Kansas, and a little bit in Arkansas for long enough that I already had relationships. But when I moved to Tennessee, I didn't know anybody in Tuscaloosa, in Auburn, in Lexington, and all these towns. But out of nowhere, people started reaching out to me on Twitter, like bar owners and promoters and things like that. And I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. I don't have to sell anymore. And my Twitter account was, I was talking about whatever people were talking about. If there was an episode of The Bachelor on and people that I was following, because I would be following college students, if they were commenting on stuff, then if I was watching it, I'd comment too. And so that was when the content thing really kind of clicked for me. Like, oh, wow, this is not about selling. It's not about like, yeah, of course, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be in Lexington, Kentucky at Two Keys Tavern on Friday night. Come see me play. But that's one tweet. And there's 50 other tweets about stuff that is, Mizzou football or, just talking about whatever people were talking about at the time. And that became really fundamental in what I'm doing now, which again, at the time, I didn't realize it. So you fast forward, go to Nashville in 2010, 2016, I wake up, I'm 40 years old in 2016, and I'm still playing music in college bars. And I got myself into a jam where I would write songs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I would leave town on Wednesday afternoon. And I moved to Nashville to write songs, but I had to be on the road to make a living. And I was doing well enough that I felt like I had to be on the road. And I did not want to be 40 years old playing in college bars anymore. I just didn't. I was like, okay, this has been awesome. I had a great time. I had some personal things happen in my life, never had any kids, but had a 10-year personal relationship that went south before I moved to Nashville. And I had the best time of my life following that passion. But I woke up one day and I was just over it. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I had decided, okay, what am I going to do? I got to get something. I've got to get some corporate experience. And I don't know what that looks like. Who's going to hire a 40-year-old who's been living in a van basically for 15 years? And so there were 3 towns that I wanted to stay in. I was in Nashville. I would have happily stayed in Nashville. I had a good group of friends that were in the music industry. And I also had a group of friends that were not in the music industry. I also loved Lexington, Kentucky, and Kansas City, my hometown. So those are the 3 towns. And I ended up sending my resume to a radio station in Kansas City. And they called me up the next day and said, hey, we want to interview you. And I was like, at that point, I was so done with the music thing that I was like, awesome. And so I ignored some red flags as far as like, why is this company so willing to hire me right out of the gate? And they were, and they did. And so I ended up going back to the same station that I started, the exact same radio station that I worked for when I was 24 or 25. Here I am 15 years later, going right back into the same, it was a different building across the street, but the same company. It was different owners, but the same radio station. So a lot of the same people were there, which was awesome because I loved the people I worked with. I loved them in 2001 and 2000, and they were still awesome people. And I got there in 2015 or 2016. So I walked in there, and the other thing I realized was, they had not changed at that time any of their systems as far as like they had no CRM at all, which was crazy to me because I was a one-man band and I had a CRM to keep track of my clients, the bars, the promoters. Like I had all my stuff like that way I was able to, I used technology, to keep up with stuff. And along the way, I had talked about Twitter being massively powerful for my music. Instagram was too. I got on Instagram in 2013, I think. And I grudgingly got onto Instagram in 2013, but I got onto it, and there were guys getting record deals at that point based on their Instagram account, which was absolutely wild to see. So Instagram was really good to me. It's the same thing as Twitter, just totally helped me, especially with that demographic. And that's back when bro country was like all the rage, like Florida Georgia Line and all that type of stuff. And I fit right into that bubble because I was just another white dude with a baseball hat and a guitar. And I looked the part. So it was really like, serendipitous, right? It was fantastic. And, anyway, so I come back to Kansas City, get a job selling radio at the radio station. And the people I worked with were great, but I knew pretty quick that this is not my forever home. This is a pit stop on my way to something else. So it took me, I got to work there in January of 2016, and it didn't take me long to realize, man, I am not going to be long for this place because there were some issues. The way things were run, I will say that I was not pleased with, and the turnover reflected that. There were people, I'd never seen so many people exiting a company in my entire life, with good reason, in my opinion. So I was working on accounts, and I had some big accounts, like I had Budweiser, and I had a few like really massive accounts, but I also had a lot of smaller accounts. And when you're selling radio advertising, the minimum budget that you're looking at is like to make a dent in a market like Kansas City, which is not a big market. It's a medium-sized market. I think it's market 29 or 30 in the country. You still need to be spending about $3,000 a month on radio advertising. And I had some clients who radio was like, it's like anything else. If you don't have the budget to do it right, then you shouldn't do it at all. And I talk about that a lot. And I include budget, not only money, but time, effort, et cetera. If you can't commit to a marketing endeavor, whether it is traditional media like newspaper, TV, or radio, or content marketing, if you don't have the ability to commit to something for at least 12 to 18 months, then you really shouldn't do it, in my opinion, because anything like that is going to take time to catch on, unless you just have a gazillion dollars and you can just flood the market, which those are not my people, right? Those are not my businesses that I work with. So when I was working with these, SMBs, these small, medium businesses, I would always talk to them about what they were doing as far as what's your social media like? What's your website like? What's your SEO like? And more often than not, they had never done any of that stuff. And when I was about 6 months to a year in at the radio station, we had contracted a digital marketing company so that we could sell like Facebook, like content creation to some of our clients. And I saw what we were selling as far as I saw the deliverables we were offering, and I saw what we were charging for them, and a switch flipped in my head. And I was like, wow, I can do this on my own. And if I can charge somebody $1,500 a month to post to Facebook 3 times a week, that's when my wheels started turning, and I started saying, okay, hold on a second. First of all, posting to Facebook 3 times a week in 2016 and 17, everything changes, and the market in the social media platforms have changed dramatically since I started doing this full time in 2017. But even then, like, I knew that posting 3 times a week to Facebook was not going to move the needle for anybody in 2016, 2017. And so I had a problem. First of all, I would never sell something to a client that I thought would just be putting good money after bad, regardless of how small in air quotes the spend is, right? So that's when I started thinking like, oh wow, I could perform these services. At the time, I think my RPI Music Instagram account, I had built it up to like 15,000 followers. I had 3,000 followers on Twitter. And again, these are not massive numbers, but I'm not a believer in the fact that, you need 1 million followers. No, for RPI Music to make a living, I needed the followers that I had, but they were highly engaged and they were real and it was authentic. And that is so valuable versus somebody that, at the time people would buy followers and all this other crazy stuff. But anyway, so that's when I realized like, okay, wow, I can go ahead and offer these services on my own. So at that point, this was, let's say I started working in January of 2016. By January of 2017, I knew that I was going to try to find something else to do. And between January and March of 2017, I realized I'm going to start managing social media for other people. And I'd figured out like kind of I had a vague idea of how I'd price my services and what I'd offer. Even though at the time I'd only created content for myself. So I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't have any real systems in place, or anything like that. So I essentially started playing music almost like full time again while I was selling radio, because at that time I was like, okay, I know I'm either going to start my own thing, my own business, or I'm going to leave here. But either way, I need to have a little like safety net of cash. So I was essentially working starting in January of 2017. I was playing music 2 or 3 times a week. And a couple of those times were in Columbia, Missouri, which is a 2-hour drive from Kansas City. And I was still working full time at the radio station selling advertising from 8:30 to 5:30. And by summertime, by spring and summer, I had decided, okay, I'm going to manage Instagram accounts for small and medium-sized businesses. And I started that by going to my current music clients and saying, hey, you run this college bar. I can help you on Instagram. And at that point, I mean, I know people were doing social media marketing and consulting and content creation, but it was nothing like it is now. Like nothing. I mean, it was none of the bars, no bars were really taking it seriously at that point. And it's like, I guess we're on Instagram. We have an Instagram account, but I don't know. We post our drink specials on there and whatever. And I said, well, I think we can really, I think we could really build a following and kind of build a community around your brand. And, one of the bars that I started working with was Harpo's in Columbia, which is, it's one of the biggest college bars in the country. So they've got, it started in 1971. They've got this great story and they've got this great tradition. And so, by July, I think it was July 1st, I picked up 2 bars. And then August 1st, I picked up 2 more bars. So by July 1st, I was essentially working 3 jobs. So I would get up in the morning. I would from 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning, I would create content for these bars. And this was I think Instagram stories just had started rolling out at that point. So I was trying to kind of experiment with that, see what was working there. And maybe stories didn't start that early, but they started right around there. And so what my week looked like at that time was I would work I'd get up 5:30 to 7:30, do social media stuff. And then I would get ready to go work from 8:30 to 5:30 selling radio. And then like Wednesdays, I would go play a local show in Kansas City from usually 8 to 10, kind of an early night. And then on Friday, I was playing every Friday in Columbia, Missouri. And this is where Fridays were tough because I would get up at 5:30 to do my social media stuff, go sell from 8:30 to 4:30 or 5. Then I would drive to Columbia, which was a 2-hour drive. And the type of music show I did a live looping show, kind of like Ed Sheeran. So I had all this crap that I set up. It took me 2 hours to set up. I would do a 4-hour show and then 2 hours to break down. So by the time I got home on Saturday morning, it was between 4 and 5 in the morning. So I was doing like 24 hours on Friday nights. And I say that to say, I share that story because it opened the opportunity for me to do what I'm doing today. Because by I guess it was October of 2017, I had given my notice. I think November 1st, I actually quit working at the radio station. And I'd picked up a 5th client on my social media stuff. And I knew at that point, I'd just been kind of trying to bank as much cash as I could. And I knew that I had a number I had to get to on the social media side of things where that combined with the music thing, I could continue playing music for as long as I needed to get my monthly, cash flow to where it needed to be. And so I remember it was the middle of October when I was able to give my notice and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to quit. And I had five clients that I was doing social media marketing for. And it was one of the best things that I ever did. And this was in October 2017. So we're coming up, just almost exactly 6 years ago. And the irony was I have not done, I've posted 15 times on my own social media accounts since then. But since then I have grown this business into something that I quite frankly only dreamed it would be. I do a ton of video marketing. I do a ton of, I build websites for clients and all this stuff. The problem was, and the reason that I didn't create content for myself, and I am just starting this podcast now, is because I did not have a definitive thing that I was doing, right? Like the way I would phrase it is I felt like I was just like a general handyman, but I was doing plumbing and HVAC and electrical work. Now, of course, this is an analogy, right? But I was doing a little bit of everything for my clients. It started out just doing managing Instagram accounts. And that was, again, you could get a lot of mileage doing organic Instagram content creation in 2017. And we were building followings for all my clients and things were going great. But then I had a client that was like, hey, I need some video work done. Can you do that? And of course, like I mentioned before, I had my old school, I had shot on a flip cam. I had done some of those things. I'd studied video production in college, but I had not updated my gear or anything. So I went out and I texted my buddy in Nashville who did all of our, this guy's had photos and posted in Rolling Stone, but he was doing video work for Sam Hunt and Lee Bryce and all these guys. And I texted Chase and I said, hey man, I got like $1,500. What's a good camera to buy? He texted me back immediately, Sony A6300. So I went out, bought a Sony A6300, and I told my client, I was like, here's the deal. I'm going to do this video work for you for free because I need to get back up to speed. I need to get up to speed with the good gear and I need to figure this out. And they were thrilled, of course, because they knew that I was going to, I had, like I said, this is going to work for you because you're going to get a free video that you like. And it's going to work for me because it's going to allow me to get reacclimated with this process. And so that was how it started. And I love the fact that every service that I offer now, I started out offering for one client for free, to one client for free, I should say. But that brings me to where I am now, which is I've launched, say like 8 podcasts and done a handful of them recently. And I've found these few things now where I'm like, okay, this is really what I want to do. And so now it's time for me to start selling my services because I know which services I want to specialize in, right? And those services are vertical video production and content production. These are things that vertical video wasn't even a thing, back when I started doing this. It wasn't even like I said, anytime you saw a vertical video, you're like, turn your phone the right way so I can see it, right? So basically everything has changed in the last 7 years, and I am thrilled to be part of this space. And what I'm hoping to build here is a community of people that are most likely going to be small to medium business owners, some marketing professionals, people that want to learn, share, and grow together about marketing. And one of the things that I have kind of latched onto is the idea of stop selling and start telling. And what that means to me is the same thing that I did back in 2011 on Twitter, which was I was in an inadvertent way selling myself. But really what I was doing was I was telling jokes. I was telling stories. I was sharing and building a community with people that were, they became friends of mine that came to my shows, that were people that were hiring me to play at their bars and things like that. So I think where we are today, I think the hard sell is a thing of the past. I think the used car salesman thing I think it's over. I think content now needs to be sharing stories. It needs to be giving people advice. It needs to be bringing value to the table, bringing your story to the table. Because at this point, I love my story, but I failed a lot before I got to where I am now. And that's why I liked, in hindsight, it all makes perfect sense on a personal level and a professional level for me. And so what I try to do is take the things that I've learned and apply them to my small, medium-sized business clients and say, okay, if you're selling hardwood flooring services, how are we going to endear you to the people that are going to want to buy your services, right? We want to go ahead and share knowledge with them. We want to answer the questions that people have when they're in that space. And I think that's where, for me, stop selling and start telling sums up everything that I do. And the reason this podcast is called Market Like a Rockstar is because you, if you're listening to this podcast, you are a rock star. Like, you don't know it yet, but this happens every single time I get a new client. And I'll go back to my fifth client, the one that allowed me to quit my job, who I love this guy to pieces. And I ended up, he was a gym owner. He is a gym owner. And I worked with him from the fall of 17 until COVID hit, and he got just devastated in March of 2020. But this guy was, I think at the time he was in his late 30s, and he'd been a personal trainer for 15 years. And he had a wealth of knowledge. I mean, the stuff this guy knew about physical fitness, about nutrition, it was so deep, and he was so wise. And he was a big fan of Andy Frisella, right? And he would always tell me, he's like, I'm not that guy. You know, I'm not that guy. He knows more than me. I don't know enough. You know, in classic imposter syndrome stuff. But the reality of it is, Jamie was a rock star, and it was up to me to get him to realize that and to bring that out. So my point of all of this is to help you find that rock star, tell your story. Okay. Like that's what this is about. That's what business is about. That's what marketing is about right now. You think you don't know as much as you do know. I guarantee you're selling yourself short. I'm not quite ready yet. Just not quite ready yet. I promise you, you are ready. You don't know you're ready, but you are ready. You do know enough. That is a guarantee. Now, I'm going to go ahead, and before I bounce out of here today, I've got 2 video clips that I want to share that I think are actually, before I bounce out of here today, I've got 1 video clip that I want to share that I think is phenomenal. There is a gal, and her name is Glenda Baker, I think. Yeah, her name is Glenda Baker. She is a real estate agent. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. She's a real estate agent in Atlanta, I believe. I don't know. I stumbled across her on TikTok, and she absolutely crushes it. She crushes it on TikTok. She gives out so much information. My wife and I bought a house 4 months ago. And so I was getting hit with that algorithm, right? And she gave so much information, ideas on investing in real estate, on interest rates. Now, she lives in Atlanta. I'm in Kansas City. I'm never going to use her as a client, but she gets social media marketing. Her content strategy is absolutely killer. And just today, honestly, like 2 hours before I started recording this first episode, this maiden voyage of the podcast, I got hit with this TikTok from her, and I'm like, this is what I'm going to talk about this today. I want you to hear the way she talks about content and the way she talks about social media marketing on this clip. And then I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Check this out.
The first question that every agent has, Glenda, how do you calculate your return on social media? It is not a tit for tat type of return on investment when you're doing social media. If you think that you're going to post a video and somebody's going to pick up the phone and say, I want to sell my house, that's not how it works. It is your opportunity to control the narrative in your community about what you're an expert of. So whether it's real estate or dentistry or an attorney, social media and video gives you the opportunity to build the credibility, just like Sandra Chong, who I'd never met in my life. She had been following me for months before she contacted me. This is not your grandma's real estate. This is social media in a new day and time. This is your opportunity to become the community local expert in the area where you work.
I absolutely love that. Like, you cannot ask for a better testimonial for content marketing than that video right there. And she nails it across the board. Well, that's a pretty good spot. I'm going to wrap up this first episode. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you sitting and listening to this. But I do. I appreciate it. And I look forward to getting better at this. This is something me just talking to a camera by myself. I'm not super used to it, but I've been making my clients do it for 5 years. So it's about time that I put myself on this side of the camera, I guess. But anyway, thanks so much for checking this out. I look forward to the next episode. And until next time, stop selling, start telling.